Amen. Good morning. The first time I've ever considered I might have good-looking feet. That got weird, right? It got weird quick. Yeah. All right, gang. Esther chapter 1 is where we're headed. If you need a Bible, there are some on the seats in front of you. If you borrow a Bible, it's on page 410. I can get you there quickly. Otherwise, you'll have to figure it out on your own. At the end of the message, as Chris said earlier, oh, by the way, and just thanks to Chris, last minute, we realized 3 of our 5 elders are not going to be here today, and so he got like double duty and all that stuff dropped on him. We're totally planned out, I swear. But Chris can handle it. That's exactly right. So takeaways. As he said, at the end of the message, I'm going to ask you, what's one thing you heard today that you want to apply to your life this week? We always want to take the message and not just hear it and learn something here, but really apply to our lives. So I would challenge you, be looking for something that you can act on throughout the week, that you can remember throughout the week. Take those notes, keep them with you. Kids, you got 5 questions. I'm going to give you the first 2. You're on your own for the last 3. And you did the work. So if you do 8 of those, you complete those, take them to Margaret, get a gift. You've put in the work. I want you to think back to the world of Ezekiel, right? We just a few books ago, not too long ago, we worked through, it took us about a little over a year to work through the entire book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel is set in captivity or in exile, right? When Judah had been conquered and exiled. And we're gonna kind of re-enter that world today, a different era of it, a little bit later, but still that era of exile. Now, Esther has a unique trait to it. The book of Esther has a unique trait to it. God is never once mentioned overtly in all 10 chapters. However, it is written to reveal to us God working the entire time. And so when we see this, in fact, we even picked up the name just God's sovereignty in the shadows, how God works behind the scenes. And so with that in mind, here's the main idea for today. Trust God's sovereignty even when he is unseen. Oftentimes in our life, we're trying to figure out, okay, where exactly is God in this moment, and we can't see it or feel it or just understand what's going on. And we're wondering, where is God? Trust in God's sovereignty even when he is unseen. Esther chapter 1, let's pick up in verse 1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. Let's pause there for a second. Kids, here's your first question. Who is Ahasuerus, and what is his other, might I say, more popular name? And the answer is Ahasuerus is also called Xerxes. Xerxes reigned over Persia about 486 to 465 BC, about a 20-year reign. His more common name when you hear of it in history is Xerxes. And this takes place roughly 500 years before Jesus or 2,500 years ago. So we're stepping way back in time into a time where the people of God are in captivity or in exile. I'm going to use the term exile today, but I want us to understand how that relates to us. We'll connect those dots in a minute. So here's what took place. The fall of Judah took place around 586 BC. That's where we pick up the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is part of that wave of exiles that were taken, conquered by Babylon, and then put in the Kabar Canal region of Babylon. So that's the beginning of exile. Now, there's Israel, the northern kingdom, fell earlier to Assyria, but this all starts to take place. Really, it all kicks in at the conquering of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. This is 100 years later. Now, the Persian Empire. So it went Assyria, Babylon, Medes, Persians, or the Medo-Persian empires. And so now we're under Persia. It's about 100 years into exile. And there's a Persian ruler, Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. Now, Esther and Mordecai are going to be 2 main characters. We're going to pick them up today. They live in exile in Persia. In fact, we're going to hear a very common city, Susa, the capital. You should be familiar with that. Daniel is in Susa. You fast forward to Nehemiah. Nehemiah, right before the final return of exiles back to Jerusalem, lives in and works in Susa, the capital. And so This has been the capital of Babylon, and then stayed and remained a major city, a capital city, even as the regimes have changed. Now, the exile may have changed forms, but God's people are still living in a foreign world, longing for God's promises to be fulfilled. Might be able to say the same thing for us, right? Kingdoms come and go, but we're still God's people living in a place not our own, longing for God to fulfill his promises in the return of Christ, right? So we understand what that should look like. And so we have to set ourselves back into that culture. Let's start back in verse 1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, that's a massive empire, by the way. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, right? Daniel and Nehemiah, again, set in Susa, so it's all connecting. Verse 3, in the third year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media, that's the Medo-Persian Empire, and the nobles and governors and provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, for 180 days. That's a party, yeah? Some of you get birthday week and birthday month. This is a 6-month feast, right? Now, there's a bit of a note here about the book. There's going to be 5 messages we're going to do in Esther. 4 of them are going to have feasts in them. 1 of them is going to have a fast. And that's kind of major to the flow. You get feasts here, you get a fast in the middle, then you get feast on the back end. It's this kind of arc that happens in Esther. We'll see it as it unfolds. This is a kind of a major backdrop or narrative clues to what's going on. Let's reread verse 4. Now, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So a 6-month-long feast/party. What was Xerxes' purpose in this 6-month-long gathering? And it just says, to show the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness. So he's flexing, right? He's just showing off. That's what he's doing. He's holding this massive party. I've never heard of a 6-month-long feast or party. And that's what he's doing. He's just entirely showing off his grandeur and greatness. That's what's going on. Let's keep reading verse 5. And when these days were complete, so when the 6 months are over, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel. So now we're moving to the city, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So first, a 6-month party for tons of military, Medo-Persian leaders, all kinds of governors and people from all the different provinces. So he kind of has a big officials things. Like we just saw some stuff over the weekend with the king of England in town, and kind of one of those big kind of high-level kind of gatherings, but massive. And when that's done, as if that wasn't enough, now Ahasuerus or Xerxes, he throws a party for everyone in the city, the capital city, the massive city of Susa. That'd be like throwing a party for everybody in LA. This is a massive thing, and he does it for another week. Listen to the following description, verse 6. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple and silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Kids, here's your second question. You're on your own for the rest. Why is so much time spent describing the events of the king's feast? And the answer is we're meant to see this super rich, over-the-top way that the king is trying to show off his wealth and power to others. Let's kind of sit in that for a minute for today. Let's just kind of think about it. Think about social media, right? Not often do we post a picture of our worst day, or our worst clothes, or our worst hair, or our worst something. Like most of the time, we're trying to do our best. We're showing our best look. We're posting a picture of our best, vehicles, or just whatever it might be. Like we're trying to show our best, and that's what he's doing. He's just gone full tilt, but he's doing it in an incredibly wealthy way that none of us can really even grasp. American culture today is similar. Even Christians today are obsessed with worldly values like wealth and beauty, trying to show off to the world around us. Cosmetic surgery, Botox, Jeeps and Harleys. Guilty. I know. Touch a nerve. I figured if I was going to hit women with cosmetic surgery and Botox, I'd hit us. So, all right. But this is a great place to pause and reflect, right? Who are we trying to impress with how we live and what we post? Right? Is it the world around us that we're told is not our home that we're trying to impress? Okay, back to King Ahasuerus and this second party. Verse 8. And drinking was according to this edict. There's no compulsion. For the king had given orders of all the staff of his palace to do as much as each man desired. So he's like, hey, it's your party, you do what you want. Verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So now, the queen, her name is Vashti, she holds a feast for the women around her, the women in the palace. All right. Now, we're going to get to kind of the thing that sets up the drama for the day. So, verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, you guys are picking that up, I'm sure, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So eunuchs are emasculated men. Parents, I'm going to punt that one to you. They were mostly in charge of the women. Okay, so that's what the eunuchs were. Now, what does King Ahasuerus tell Queen Vashti to do? I want you to read verse 11 with me again, and we'll unpack it. So the king tells the eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. Now, it's a little innocuous in the way it's written, but what does King Ahasuerus tell Queen Vashti to do? He tells her to show up to the party in her crown. And that's it. There we go. All right. Now her response is going to make more sense. It's written subtly. She's lovely to look at, etc. Show up in your crown. So that's what he does. So now you can kind of see Xerxes as he's been spending months showing off all of his wealth and power and objects. And now as he turns to his queen, she is simply one more object for him to show off. Verse 12. Now you're going to get her response, right? But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. And at this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So she doesn't want to show up in her crown, right, and be the object of his bragging right now, so she refuses. But let's sit in this culture for a minute. Let's figure out, okay, why is this such a big deal? Like, he spends his life showing off his wealth and his power and his possessions, and eventually even treats his wife, the queen, like another possession to display. And Queen Vashti, she's valued for her beauty, yet she refuses to be publicly objectified for the entertainment of others. But this is what the world does, right? A worldly culture teaches people to build their identity on worldly things. So this culture is filled with power and money and status and beauty and possessions and attention and approval. And today, our world is filled with power and money and status and beauty and possessions and attention and approval. Those are the things that we too often find ourselves striving for. But when you live in the world and have worldly values, you will also be treated by those worldly values. Men, if your identity is built on success, possessions, image, or status, people will often value you only for what you can provide or display. Women, if your identity is built primarily on outward beauty and admiration, people will often value your appearance more than your heart and soul and the person that God created you to be. So don't spend your time on your beauty more than your soul. And men, don't spend your life creating possessions that you can't take with you. This is why life as exiles is so dangerous. The culture around us is constantly pressuring us to find our worth in temporary, worldly things instead of God. For all of us who follow Jesus, we were not created to live for the approval of Persia. Right? We're created to live for the glory of God. So point number 1 today, don't envy the world. Do not let a broken world shape who you are or what you admire. Don't let the world shape your values. Now, that's like saying jump in the ocean and try not to get wet. Right? I mean, it's the world we live in. It's the thing that is all around us. But in Christ, it is possible. But do not let a broken world shape who you are or what you admire. If this resonates, you might ask yourself, what shapes my identity? What captures my admiration? What kind of kingdom am I living for? Let's keep going. Verse 13. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the next men to him bringing Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 provinces of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. So here's what the king says. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of the king Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? So Xerxes, instead of seeking relationship advice, tries to figure out what he should do with this rebellious woman, if you will. Verse 16, then Memucan said in his presence to the king of all the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. Right? He says, and use the word done wrong. What she has done wrong. But it's the same word that's often translated as sin. Like when the prophet confronts David over his sin with Bathsheba, uses the same word. It's portraying this idea as if they think that Queen Vashti has sinned against Ahasuerus and all of Persia. Let's start back at verse 16. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. During this whole book, you should see the humor of standing outside and reading this, right? Okay, this very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. It's like saying, you let her drive, they're all going to want to drive. Right? I mean, you can kind of hear that in the culture. So they ask, what is to be done about this great injustice of Queen Vashti not obeying this ridiculous command? And they act as if this one action is going to corrupt all women everywhere. Right? Worldly culture and logic is funny like that. Like it's just so broken from the beginning, and it keeps getting more and more broken as you kind of go down the line. Now, the Bible teaches that men and women are created equal but different, and that God has uniquely called men to lead only in 2 places, in the home and in the church, because they're a metaphor for each other. But then we see all throughout Scripture these errors of going between patriarchalism and feminism, and these swings and shifts corrupting it. And then we see the people of God living in the world that's around them, and oftentimes even being infected by it. Without condoning it, we often see God's people participating in it. Again, without Scripture condoning it. And so really, this opening chapter of the book of Esther is mocking the culture that it's set in. So back to our story. As these men try and figure out to harness the wild women. Verse 19. If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him. Let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Well, let's make a law. Let's put out a rule. Now, this and a few things that we're going to see today are really foreshadowing things that are to come in the rest of the book. Like this one. This passage here reveals something that's going to be important in the next couple messages, where a Persian edict by a king cannot be revoked even by the king who made it. Right? And they're saying, make this law so that no one can change it. Not even the king who puts it out there can change it. Well, that's going to be a problem later in the book, right? It's kind of tipping its hand towards that. Let's keep going. Verse 20. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. You can see this is how women end up in burqas, right? Verse 21, the advice pleased the king and princes as the king did as Memucan proposed. And he sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. There's a bit of an irony here. We don't want anyone to know what Queen Vashti did because it'll infect everyone else. So let's make a rule and tell everyone. You with me? If you have to make a law that you're master in your own house, I question your authority to begin with, right? That's what they're doing. They're kind of setting this in place. Now, why does this chapter exist? And it sounds like an odd question, but the setup, because this chapter has almost nothing to do with the rest of the book, it's just kind of this long chapter that could have been summarized in a paragraph, but it exists in a chapter. And it's really to show the types of difficulties we experience in this world. And it is to unpack a bit of worldly culture, even, well, kind of making fun of it, or at least sitting outside of it and recognizing how sometimes the world and us in the world just do some really dumb things or think really kind of dumb ways, right? And so it's a chapter instead of a paragraph saying, okay, so Xerxes lost his queen and wanted another one. Now chapter 2, which we're going to get into, right? It could have done that. But it really unpacks the culture of the world so that we can see it, so we can set our characters in it, but also so we can kind of set ourselves in it today, because not a whole lot has changed. I mean, I haven't heard of a 6-month party in a long time, but I see all the other stuff, right? Now, the New Testament portrays Christians, followers of Jesus, as strangers in this world, as sojourners here, and exiles in this present world. Right? And so the New Testament connects the dots for us and brings us back to stories like Daniel or Ezekiel or Esther or Ezra or Nehemiah or others, Jeremiah, that put the people of God in exile. The New Testament connects us to that so that we should understand there's a bit of how they understood their life that we should understand our life. Make sense? This is the world where we live for now, but it's not our true home. Right? Point number 2 today, exile is not our home. Do not become so comfortable in exile that you forget where you belong. Christians are not called to escape the world we live in, but neither are we called to belong to the world we live in. We belong to a kingdom that is far greater than this. So do not become so comfortable here in exile today that you forget where you belong. Each week as we talk about the gospel, we remind ourselves of the very work of Christ. We typically back up, right? And we start with God's creation of humanity. God created us, made us, designed us, loves us, and made us without sin. In fact, set humanity in ultimately a perfect world, a sinless world. Set them in Eden, in the garden, in beauty, in perfection, if you will. But then sin enters into human history, and sin breaks humanity. In fact, sin separates humanity's relationship from God. And so God removes humanity from the garden, kicks them out of the garden, and sends them off into the world to work and labor and toil, now infected by sin. And we always kind of emphasize that knowing we couldn't work our way back to God, so Jesus came to us. So God, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, comes to us, and he embodies human flesh, becomes fully human while remaining fully God, and he lives the life you and I are called to live, but choose not to. And then he dies for sin. He trades his life and gives himself in our place. He dies to cover our sin and resurrects to give us new life, and ascends back to heaven where we worship and glorify Jesus today. But I want you to think of this move from Eden to the world to the return of Christ, where he will take us into eternity forever. And all of humanity, all of those who are God's people, who are in Christ, should see ourselves as being removed from our home and living in exile until we return to our home. And we get this graphic description of the people of God in the Old Testament as they ebb and flow throughout a land. First, there are people with no land, then they're given land, then they're kicked out of their land, then they're restored to their land, and then somebody conquers their land and they're still allowed to live in it, and they're constantly living in a place that is not their own. Jesus is born into a world like that. He's born into, he may live in Israel, but he's under Roman authority. But Jesus also left his home in the very presence of God to enter our world. So Jesus knows what it is to be a sojourner and exile. And so when the New Testament paints this picture for us, they've given us this graphic illustration of Israel losing their land, being taken away, and longing to return, and even at the end of the Old Testament, returning back to their land. We get this graphic depiction of it. But we get a greater meta-narrative from Genesis in the garden to Revelation in eternity, where we exist in this middle, where we exist living in a place that is not what we were meant to be. So the world's kingdoms look glorious, but they fade. God's people are exiles awaiting a better kingdom. God may seem hidden, yet he is working, and his promises are ultimately fulfilled in Christ. John chapter 1 says this: the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He, Jesus, was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. If Jesus, the creator of everything, enters into human history, into the human beings he created, and he did it for them, and they reject him, what might our life look like too? We should not expect to be loved by the world, especially as we live for Jesus. We should not expect to be at home in the world because we're a part of a different kingdom. We're called to be in the world, but not of the world. We're called to be here so we can represent Jesus here so other people can know Christ through us, but we should never be comfortable here. Esther chapter 2, let's pick that story back up, verse 1. After these things, when the anger of the king Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So Ahasuerus is sobered up. He's not mad anymore. And now he's like, now I don't have a queen, right? Now he's kind of feeling the impact of a dumb decision. Verse 2. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them. So, a harem. The king has a harem of women for pleasure purely, right? But he's now without a queen. And they're like, okay, well, let's go out and draft a bunch of women. Let's just go find all the best-looking women. Let's gather them up. I mean, literally, that's what's going on. You should sit outside the story and kind of laugh at it, right? You should see it, and it should feel a little ridiculous. And then think about the world we live in and go, yeah, it's not that different, right? I mean, like, it kind of resonates. Verse 4. And let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Of course it pleased the king, right? Yeah. Right? Again, you should just sit out beside the story, right? Verse 5, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, not like the capital city, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. I'm going to reread that verse in a minute, but there's a few important things that we learn about Mordecai that are important not just today, but for the entire book. And so we're introduced to a main character, Mordecai, right? Mordecai is a descendant of Benjamin, and particularly from the line of Kish, right? That means Mordecai is related to King Saul. Well, now we're going to address that next week. That's going to be a thing next week. Mordecai is living in Susa, which is going to be important in the very next verse. And Mordecai's lineage serves two purposes for us, right? The first purpose is the connection to Saul in the line of Kish is going to set us up for the next chapter when we meet an Agagite. I don't know if I can say that, so I'll practice this week. A descendant of King Agag. That's the one that Saul was told to go and kill everybody, and instead Saul captured him like a trophy, right? And so the prophet goes in and hacks him up. It's a great story. Anyhow, so we're going to meet two descendants of these two people. One is Mordecai, one's a descendant of Agag. Right now, that's important next week. Again, like I said, we'll cover that. But the second purpose, the more important purpose today, is Mordecai is a descendant of Benjamin, which means, what is that, a great-great-great-grandson or something like that of who Benjamin is, of Abraham, right? Abraham is the one that God made a covenant with that is an eternal covenant, that is lasting until it finds its fulfillment in Christ. Okay, so way back in Genesis, God covenants with Abraham. In Genesis 17, it says this, God speaking, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. Now here's what's important for us today. And I will give to you and your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So I don't know how many generations later after Abraham, a descendant of Abraham's, Mordecai, is living in exile where there's a covenant promise of God to be restored back to the land. You with me? He is reminding us now with this lineage that though Mordecai lives in exile, God has promised to deliver him back to the land, right? Let's read verse 5 again. Listen to how our author highlights that last piece. Ready? Verse 5. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been, carried away, there's one, from Jerusalem among the captives, here it goes, carried away, that's two, with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had, number 3, carried away. Mordecai literally was there and got carried away in that final wave of exiles. There's this defining detail about Mordecai is he knew the land, he's removed from the land, and he's waiting to be restored to the land, right? And it's emphasizing this piece of the puzzle to us. The carried away emphasis is meant to connect us to the narrative of the exile and the promise of God to restore his people to the land and use them to bring us the Messiah, Jesus, 2,000 years ago. That's the promise that's being kind of identified here. So Mordecai is in exile, but he's living under God's promise of deliverance. Let's see how this plays out. Verse 7. Mordecai was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So again, now Esther is the main character of the book. Mordecai is clearly a main character, but the book is named for Esther, right? It's named after her. We're going to follow her story. And so notice today that Esther is noted to be Jewish by her relationship to Mordecai. And this is going to come up like 4 different times today. It's going to refer back to her being Jewish. We're not going to talk about each one of them. Just catch that piece of the puzzle. It's connecting us to the same promise we just connected Mordecai to, right? Let's pick back up in verse 7. Mordecai was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. So Esther is swept into this worldly system she did not create and likely did not choose to participate in. Yet even there, God is quietly positioning her for his purposes. Now let's see what happens. Verse 9. And the young woman pleased him, meaning Haggai, and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Now, God uses people in unlikely places by giving them favor in the world they live in, right? Think back to, it says, the young woman Esther pleased Haggai and won his favor. So think back to like Daniel in Babylon and how he's shown favor by the eunuchs in that kingdom. Think even further back. Think about Joseph, even when he goes to prison and the jailer shows him favor, and then he gets out and he finds favor all the way up to Potiphar's house, right? Hundreds of women are taken here, but Esther is shown favor, right? The subtext here, we're meant to see God sovereignly working behind the scenes in and through his people. Let's keep reading. Verse 10. Esther had not made known her people or her kindred, right? Talking about her Jewishness. For Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into the king Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil and myrrh, 6 months with spices and ointments for women, and you thought it took women a long time to get ready today. Verse 13, when the young woman went into the king this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. This is what happens when my wife's not here. I say things I shouldn't, I make dumb jokes. All right. In the evening, she would go in. In the morning, she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shashgazaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. And she would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So there's a second harem. So there's this one where they spend a year doing nothing except getting ready. And then there's this, then the king just selects one, and one probably daily, I would assume, right? And then really they're going to move over to this second harem, and they'll never see the king again unless they're chosen as queen. So you can see there's literally hundreds of women here, and there's probably all these ones over here, and your most likely thing to happen, statistically, you're going to go from here through this night to here. And that's it. Statistically, that's what happens to most of them, right? That's the most likely outcome. Can you think of a time where the odds were completely against you and the outcome you wanted, and yet God somehow provides for you? This is one of those moments where you're like, I don't really know what Esther wants. My guess is she wants no part of any of this. But she lives in a system she didn't create, and she's a part of it. And so she gets drafted here. She didn't volunteer. She's more conscripted here. And then she's going to have one night where she's going to spend with the king, and then likely end over here. But obviously, you know the story. That's not what's going to take place. So listen to Esther's, first her faith before everything works out. Verse 15. When the term came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except for what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now, Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So why is Esther's asking for nothing important to the story? And what does it reveal about her? Esther, though unsaid, is showing her faith and trust in God. She's not trying to get out of it. She's not trying to win it. She's just trusting. She's just kind of living within the system she's been given and God is showing her favor. And so she takes the advice, and she goes. She trusts that God will keep her. The author keeps reminding us that Esther belongs to God's covenant people. And what are we to do with this, right? We're to read the author's hints and clues and see God's active engagement in the lives of his people, that God is sovereignly acting in the shadows. Let's keep reading, verse 16. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. God's action is seen in the king choosing Esther from among hundreds of women to become the next queen of Persia, a Jewish woman, queen of Persia, right? That line, she won grace and favor, just kind of leaps out like God behind the scenes is orchestrating this. So point number 3 today, do not assume God is absent. Keep trusting God's sovereignty even when you cannot see what he is doing. Do we have that one? I'll read it to you again. Do not assume God is absent. Keep trusting God's sovereignty even when you cannot see what he is doing. I feel like much of life is lived here, where we can't exactly see what God is doing, and we are called by faith to trust. We know God's here. We know God's good. We know he's acting. We just don't know what he's doing. I feel like, again, that is just much of life. So keep trusting God's sovereignty even when you cannot see what he's doing. All right, so now Esther is queen, and we're going to start to see why God has placed her there. Verse 18. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast, so we have another feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now, his position at the gate is important. We'll see that in a second. Verse 20. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people. Again, reminder of her Jewishness, right? As Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So God's covenant promise to save his people is central to this story. And the key takeaway is how we should live while we're like this, right? As we keep being referred back to this promise, we're to set ourselves inside of it, and we're kind of to connect to those New Testament teachings that remind us that this is our life here on earth, and we're to ask ourselves, how then should we live in this world? So how should we live as sojourners and exiles? And just notice, they're not all caught up in the politics of it. They're not all caught up in the things that they could be involved in. But subtly, as they honor God, they allow God to move them and place them, again, sovereignly for his glory and for their good. Let's see why this is important. Okay, so, by the way, Mordecai sitting at the gate. That's a place for the officials. When you say sitting by the gate, we don't connect that because that's not a big deal for us, right? But this is in the place where the officials would hang out, and they would talk, and they would plan out things, and they would just kind of meet. It was an official spot. So let's see why that's important. Verse 21. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. So there's a plot to kill Ahasuerus or Xerxes, right? Now the question is, you got to wonder, why does Mordecai tell the king about the plot against his life, and why is that important to us? Like, why does he tip off the Persian ruler who won't let them go back to their home, right? I mean, you've got to wonder, right? Think of the political divisions today, and just you're on one side or the other, and you're like, this is going to happen. Do you do the right thing, right? So why does he? And it's because Mordecai is still called to honor God and live rightly in exile. Right? Politically, that's something the church needs to hear today. We're still called to live rightly and honor God, even while here. Right? And I say that unilaterally, both sides, with all the craziness that's going on. We're called to glorify God and always do the right thing. So just because circumstances are not always great doesn't mean we're allowed to live any other way than God honoring. Let's listen to the outcome. Start back with verse 22. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found out to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So Mordecai saves a pagan king's life. So just a thought for a question. Do you do the right thing even when others don't deserve it? Let me just add to this. Persian culture rewarded favors pretty lavishly. Like, just go back to the big 6-month-long party they threw, right? They're pretty lavish givers. And Persian culture explicitly rewards people who do good things for you. And what happens with Mordecai is he tips this off and gets nothing in return. He's going to get completely overlooked. But he's still going to continue to do the right thing. Do we? Do we do the right thing when we get overlooked? Do we do the right thing when it's in a world where we disagree with things? Do we live rightly and honor God with all our decisions, no matter the setting we're in? So point number 4 today, live by God's promises. Live faithfully today while trusting God with tomorrow. Live faithfully today while trusting God with tomorrow. So this book this message sets us up for the rest of the book, right? There's God's sovereignty back in the shadows, behind the scenes where no one can see. God is moving. God is acting. God keeps Esther and moves her into a position of prominence, literally as queen. God uses Mordecai to prevent the death of the king. And God is going to continue to show his favor on his people, and they're going to become much greater circumstances and far more about God's people than they are today. But Mordecai doing the right thing for someone else today is eventually going to pay off when Mordecai gets to do the right thing for his own people. But it's the actions that he takes today, when it doesn't look like it's about him at all, but he does the right thing, he honors God with his decisions, that's going to set him up for things that are to come. So, we'll pause here today. What applications will you make? What's something you heard today that you want to apply to your life this week? For me, I want to live less like this world is my home and focus more on my eternal home in heaven. I rarely do that. I rarely consider, okay, what would be different if I was not thinking about today, tomorrow, the next day, and I was thinking about eternity? If you're a church member, you have the responsibility to keep one another, to keep God's promises in front of all of us. Keep our eyes as church members, keep our eyes on the promises of God together. Help keep us looking at the promises of God. If you're new to the faith, Jesus changes our hearts to not love worldly things in the same way. If you look more like the world, pursue discipleship with older believers. Let Jesus transform your desires in your heart. If you're not a follower of Jesus yet, this world is not forever. Jesus alone is forever. Turn to Jesus for a life that begins now and lives into eternity. Parents, learn to focus your kids on the kingdom, not just raising them for colleges and careers. Well, something you heard today you want to apply to your life this week. Why don't you turn? Let's take some time in families or little small groups and share your takeaway with someone else.